watching your lectures. I've decided to establish a purpose. I'm trying to tell the truth, and things are way better. And the last 2 months, so that's probably 20,000 people, and about half of them, a third to half of them, have stayed afterwards to talk to me. So that's about 7,000 people who have said that to me. And then people stop me on the street all the time and tell me exactly that life is way better than it was. It's like, it's so good. And I've got like, I don't know, 35,000 letters from people since last August. It's more than that. I can't keep track of them. It's exactly that. Thank you for that. I can see that in the audience. It's so interesting because I can lay out a story. People go like this. And they're doing that all the time. It's like the lights are going on. And that's really, well, there's almost nothing better than that, to watch lights go on when you're talking to people. It's like, that's just absolutely fantastic. But to get this response from people, my father's about 80. I put him in charge of going through my viewer email, which is an overwhelming job. But no, we've had discussions about this constantly. He's overwhelmed by the fact that so many people are writing and saying the same thing. It's like, well, I have a purpose, man. My life actually matters. I finally realized that, and I'm putting it into practice. I'm bearing up under the heaviest load I can imagine, and it's really helping. It's like, God, that's tens of thousands of responses now. So it's you couldn't hope for anything better than that. There's zero harm in it, right? It's just people putting their lives together. They're not mucking about with other people. They're not trying to make broad-scale social transformations about which they have no idea. They're trying to make their immediate environment better. And it's working. It's like, great. Well, great. A journalist asked me why people are responding so positively to what I'm saying. The young men, for example. And I thought, why? Yeah, that's a good question. Since, well, I'm actually on their side. I'm really happy that they're not wasting their lives. I'm really sad to see that people are disenchanted and nihilistic and depressed and anxious and aimless and perverse and vengeful and all of those things. It's terrible. And then to see people question whether that's necessary and then to start to rise out of it. It's like, it's so fun. Like last night, I was after my talk. It's overwhelming. I don't usually think about these things, but I was after my talk last night, and so all these people line up. You know, they have their 15 seconds with me, and they're kind of tentative. They're excited and tentative when they come up to talk to me, and then they have, 15 seconds of time to tell me something. I'm really listening to them, and they're hesitant about whether or not to share the good news about their life, and I think it's often because when people share good news about their life, people don't necessarily respond positively. They don't get encouragement. And people need so little encouragement. It's just unbelievable. And so they'll tell me something good, and I'm thinking, God, that's so good. Somebody says, oh, I'm getting along way better with my father. I haven't seen him for 10 years, and now we're getting along. It's like, God, great. And then the power of that, you can't overstate the power of that for individuals to get their life together. The individual is an unbelievably powerful force, and every single person who gets their act together a little bit has the capacity to spread that around them. It's a chain reaction, and so it's a lovely thing to see, and it's fantastic. One of the things I tend to do is to look at symbolic representations through the lens of evolutionary biology, rather than assuming that these representations are mere superstitions or play no functions. Like we have the idea that there's a deity that's father-like. So it's a disembodied spirit in some sense that's eternal, that has paternal characteristics. It's like, okay, well, strip it of its metaphysics. Only I'm not saying that fundamentally you have to strip it of its metaphysics. I'm not making that claim. I'm saying if you strip it of its metaphysics and just look at it as a biological phenomenon, it's like, well, what might the idea that there's an eternal paternal spirit, what might that be a reflection of? Well, it's like, well, there's you imitating your father, but your father imitated his father, and his father imitated his father. So in some sense, what your father actually imitated was the pattern of fathers across time. And you could think of the transcendent father as the pattern of fathers across time. That's the right way to think about it. And it's even imitates his father in pretend play. You know, you think, well, when you're pretending, you're imitating. We're pretending to be your father when you're playing house, for example. You're imitating your father. It's like, no. If I'm imitating you, I do this, right? So I'm mimicking what you're doing with my body. But when I'm pretending to be my father, I'm doing something way more sophisticated than that. I'm observing my father across multiple situations, and then I'm abstracting out the commonalities in behavior and attitude across those situations that make him father. And then I incorporate that and dramatize it in my pretend play. It's unbelievably sophisticated. And so it's what the child is doing in pretend play is coming to embody the disembodied spirit of the father. So that's the disembodied spirit. But that disembodied spirit is a reflection insofar as the child is making contact with the father and not just the idiosyncratic personality of his particular father. He's abstracting out the generality across all those situations. And that generality is in turn a reflection of the imitation of the father going all the way back in time. And so you think, well, that is a disembodied spirit. It's a disembodied spirit that's incarnated in the collective of fathers across time. And what is that? Well, it's a judge. That's for sure. It's a judge. Even when you interact with the hierarchy of men who are currently alive, something can be abstracted out of that that's like the patriarchal spirit. And if you don't think that's judging you, you are not thinking. It's absolutely judging you. That's what rank orders you in a hierarchy. It's even what the feminists accuse our culture of being, that disembodied, judgmental, patriarchal spirit. There's something to that. Of course, they think of it only as a big mistake. The radical leftist feminist critics, to be more precise, and not all of them are even feminist, make the argument that there's nothing in our hierarchies except tyranny and exclusion. It's like, well, that's completely preposterous. They say that while sitting in comfortable armchairs with the electricity on and the water running and no riots in the street and well fed and well clothed and protected from their enemies. I mean, it's so preposterous. I can't even believe we've even come to this point.
That's because of hierarchies that they're not looking at.
Of course. And of course the hierarchies tend towards corruption and blindness, obviously. And when they become corrupt, then they're more likely to be dominated by people who use power as their fundamental mode of being. But that doesn't mean that bloody hierarchy is nothing but a corrupt tyranny of power to begin with. I mean, that's the definition of the ultimate authoritarian state. And if you think Western society is the ultimate authoritarian state, then your level of naivety is something on the order of miraculous. What kind of relationship do you have with your father, your real father? It's often ambivalent, right? Because there's an element of him that encouraged you, hopefully, because without the encouragement of your father, man, the world is a dismal place. It's very difficult to be a courageous person unless you have your father in body and spirit behind you. It's very demoralizing. Like, it really kills people not to have their mother. They just don't recover from that. And I think people can recover from a fragmented father relationship, but it's the next worst thing. You know, because if your father rejects you or doesn't form a relationship with you, it's as if the spirit of civilization has left you outside the walls as of little worth. It's very difficult for people to recover from that. So the father should be an encouraging force, but can be a tyrannical and crushing force. And so that's a very difficult thing to get right, partly because if you're my son, then I should impose the highest standards of behavior on you. And I should always be judging what you're doing. I should be judging it with the aim of making the best in you come forward. But getting that balance exactly right is very difficult. And so it's easy for a father to swing too much into judgment, let's say. And then, of course, mothers can play this role too, to swing too far into the domain of judgment and to be too harsh. And to the degree that the father has his own pathologies, he's going to do that imperfectly. You know, he might be someone who's the father who devours his son because he's jealous of the new possibility, the new potential, the struggle for attention and love from the mother or from the other children in the family. There's all sorts of things that can go terribly wrong. So that's the father as wise king. And that's another symbol that's been lost, I would say, to a massive degree in modern universities, because it tests itself everywhere, especially in the universities, which are like they're as close to an ideal environment as you could, as human beings have ever been able to create. It's as simple as that. And if you can't be grateful for the structure of the university with all its imperfections, then you're completely blind to this element of the archetype. And that's the opposite of it. That's the son that devours, the king that devours his own son. That's a tyrant. You know, that's like the mother who's too overprotective. It's the male version of that. And the mother that's too overprotective says, I'll never let anything happen to you. It's like, well, maybe you actually want to have something happen to you. You know, it's a bit of an all-inclusive statement. It's like, no, I'm going to make you strong so any number of things can happen to you. And when you need some care, I'll be there. But otherwise, like out into the world with you, that's the right attitude. And for the father, it's like, get your bloody act together. But I'm on your side. It's not because I want to destroy you or demean you or push you down in the dominance hierarchy, but because I want the best in you to emerge. And so you need standards. It's like, what are you doing wasting your life? There's way more than that to you. Get your act together and bring it out. And that's a message that people really want to hear if they have any sense at all. And generally, they do want to hear it. So, I've been talking to a lot of people recently, as perhaps you know. And I was talking to one of the leaders of the Conservatives this morning, and they're asking me about, the person was asking me about Bill C-16, but more specifically about talking to young people, because the Conservative leadership struggle is going on right now. I've been talking to a bunch of them, and I said, well, look, one of the things you could do for young people that no one's doing is to talk to them about responsibility, because everyone talks to young people about rights. It's like, we need our rights. It's like, oh God, how many rights do you need? You know, really, like you have more privileges than any people who've ever lived anywhere. Well, it's so dull to hear. It's so dull. It's so pathetic and what would you call it? It's so demeaning. You have to be protected and have your rights. It's like I said, there's a huge marketplace for responsibility. That's what you want to talk to young people about. It's like, get your act together and do something worthwhile with your life. For the first time in my entire adult life, the Conservatives actually have something to sell young people, right? They could sell them responsibility. It's like, well, why? Because that's where life has meaning with responsibility. The more responsibility you take on, the more meaning your life has. And the higher degree of responsibility that you agree voluntarily to try to bear, the richer your life will be. And no one's ever told that, and it's the case. You know, it's like you have 4 kids, say, well, that's plenty of responsibility. You're going to have meaning. It's going to be rough, you know, because it's complicated. You have a complicated job, and you try to help the careers of the people around you. You try to solve tough problems and aid suffering and do all of that. It's like, it's weight, it's responsibility, but there's glory in it. There's real glory in it. There's deep meaning in it. And young people are starving for that because no one ever tells them that. It's like, you're way more than you think, man. Stand up, do something difficult. Do something difficult and heroic, right? Burst out of your bonds. It's like, that's a good message. It's a necessary message, because we have to be more than we are, because if we aren't, we're not going to survive. What's interesting now is that every public appearance that I've made that's related to the sort of topics that we're discussing is overwhelmingly men. It's like 85 to 90%. And so I thought, wow, that's weird. Like, what the hell's going on here exactly? And then the other thing I've noticed is that I've been talking a lot to the crowds that I've been talking to, not about rights, but about responsibility, right? Because you can't have the bloody conversation. What are you doing? You can't have the conversation about rights without the conversation about responsibility, because your rights are my responsibility. That's what they are, technically. So you just can't have only half of that discussion. And we're only having half that discussion. And the question is, well, what the hell are you leaving out if you only have that half of the discussion? And the answer is, well, you're leaving out responsibility. And then the question is, well, what are you leaving out if you're leaving out responsibility? And the answer might be, Well, maybe you're leaving out the meaning of life. That's what it looks like to me. It's like, here you are, suffering away. What makes it worthwhile? Rights? You know, you're completely out. You have no idea what it's almost impossible to describe how bad an idea that is. Responsibility. That's what gives life meaning. It's like lift a load. Then you can tolerate yourself, right? Because look at, you're useless, easily hurt, easily killed. Why should you have any self-respect? That's the story of the fall. Pick something up and carry it. Make it heavy enough so that you can think, yeah, well, useless as I am, at least I could move that from there to there. Well, what's really cool about that is that when I talk to these crowds about this, the men's eyes light up. And that's very, like, I've seen that phenomenon because I've been talking about this mythological material for a long time. And I can see when I'm watching crowds, people, you know, their eyebrows lift, their eyes light up because I put something together for them. That's what mythological stories do. So I'm not taking responsibility for that. That's what the stories do. So I say the story, people go click, 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 you know, and their eyes light up. But this responsibility thing, that's a whole new order of this, is that young men are so hungry for that, it is unbelievable. And one of the things I've been talking to some of the people who've been running for the Conservative leadership in Canada, and I've been talking to them about, well, the difficulties they have communicating with young people. I don't know how long to play this for, but what the hell are they going to sell to young people, right? Because being conservative is something that happens when you're older. They can sell responsibility. No one's selling it. And the thing is, for men, there's nothing but responsibility.
But I'm not.
Men have to figure out what they have to do. And if they have nothing worth living for, then they stay Peter Pan.
Mother being told.
And why the hell not? Because the alternative to value responsibility is impulsive, low class,
and questioning and answering.
And you saw that in the Pinocchio story, right? That's Pleasure Island. It's like, well, why lift the load if there's nothing in it for you?
Nobody did it for me.
That's another thing that we're doing to men. It's a very bad idea. And to boys. It's like,
because the judge said, hey,
you're pathological and oppressive. It's like, fine, then why the hell am I going to play? That's the situation. If I get no credit for bearing responsibility, you can bloody well be sure I'm not going to bear it. But then, you know, your life is useless and meaningless. And you're full of self-contempt and nihilism. And that's not good. And so that's why I think, that's what I think is going on at a deeper level with regards to men needing this direction. A man has to decide that he's going to do something. He has to decide that.
So this is Jordan Peterson, for those that don't know.
Most of us have never been in the concentration camp experience. We've never had to go through that horror and tragedy. And so one would think that today it would be easier to find meaning in life. And yet I sense that it's more difficult in a sense today than it was in years past. Do you think that?
You're absolutely right.
Well, why is that?
Because we are living in a society, either in terms of an affluent society or in terms of a welfare state, as we in Austria are living in. Anyway, these types of societies virtually, or at least they are out virtually to satisfy and gratify each and every human need. Except for one need, the most basic and fundamental need operant in man, the need for meaning. Consumer societies even creating needs, but the need for meaning, or as I'm used to referring to it, the will to meaning remains unfulfilled. It's what I'm used to calling recently the unheard cry for meaning. You scarcely will find any reference to what is the most fundamental and basic concern of man. Neither pleasure nor happiness, nor power or prestige, but originally and basically his wish, his desire to find and fulfill a meaning in his life, or for that matter, in each single life situation confronting him. And if there is a meaning to fulfill, if he's aware, if he becomes cognizant of such a meaning, then he's ready to suffer, he's ready to offer sacrifices, he's ready to undergo tension, stress, and so forth without any harm being done to his health. But if there is no meaning available, no meaning in his visual field, then he takes his life. Can you imagine a situation for a human being which is more full of stress than Auschwitz? And virtually all neurotic symptomatology disappeared in Auschwitz. And the degree to which suicide took place in Auschwitz and Dachau was astonishingly, surprisingly
As you
low.
know, I don't
On the
advocate
other
for the
hand,
mask. It's for
in the
you.
welfare state of Austria, a
I put
teacher
a link
showed
to what's
me
on at the
a
moment.
list
I don't know if
of
someone's run through. So
questions
anyway,
his
let me get back to where I was.
his pupils were allowed to
Let's
ask
see what I'm
him,
listening to now. Is it
you
one
know,
over?
what was
No,
top
it's still the
rank
same. Let it carry on. It's not
on
got
the
long
list
left.
as to the frequency of the questions.
I must
Suicide
have listened
among
to a lot longer than you
youngsters of
guys
14
have.
to 15 years of age in a welfare state such as Austria.
It's called Don't Waste Your
Suicide.
Time, How to Reinvent
There were
Yourself.
virtually no
In
stress or
2021,
tensions
Jordan
because they
Peterson
are
Motivation
pampered. Nobody
went up on the 4th of Jan
allows himself
2021.
to challenge them. What young people need are ideals and challenges, personal tasks,
So we've got a
and,
couple of minutes
and
left.
to begin with in the
So
first
join
place,
me.
examples,
Anyway, I have a mask. I
personal
just don't wear a mask.
examples,
Well, I do and I don't.
but not the
Because
cowards.
I've never
or
said there's
coward
not a
people
virus.
who
And I've
don't
always said
venture
it was
to
going to be
confront them
changing
with
as the
anything
locusts will come.
because
So,
they might become angry
and I've
because they
always
are
said
challenged.
it's not going to be
Neither
this big
parents
summer
nor
you've all
school
been looking for
teachers
in the big heat. It's
are
always going to be
courageous
a
enough to challenge them. Don't
call it
arouse tensions. Don't
I see.
create
So
tensions.
anyway,
Don't
conclusion.
put stress on them.
But anyway, listen.
See, people are today, they are not over demanded,
Yeah,
they are under
if not,
demand.
I've got in front of me parties to proceedings, 9 o'clock.
There's constraints on what you should regard as a value, but within those constraints you have the choice. You have choice. Well, the thing is that people will carry a heavy load if they get to pick the goddamn load. So, and they think, well, I won't carry any load. It's like, okay, fine, but then you're like the sled dog that doesn't have a sled to pull. You're gonna tear pieces out of your own legs because you're bored. You know, people are pack animals. They need to pull against a weight, and that's not true for everyone. It's not true particularly, say, for low conscientious people. I mean, maybe they're open and creative or extroverted and some other things, but for the typical person, they'll eat themselves up unless they have a load. This is why there's such an opiate epidemic among dispossessed white middle-aged guys who are unemployed in the U.S. It's like they lose their job, they're done. Right? They despise themselves. They develop chronic pain syndromes and depression, and the chronic pain is treated with opiates. It's like that's what we're doing. So,
how I feel about Monday morning.
That's what it looks like to me.
If I choose to just
you have to, and it's so interesting to watch the young men when you talk to them about responsibility. They're so goddamn thrilled about it. It just blows me away. It's like, really? That's the counterculture. Grow the hell up and do something useful. Really? I could do that? Oh, I'm so excited by that idea. No one ever mentioned that before. It's like rights. Jesus.
Adoption. However,
it's
panic has occurred because
I feel that that's deeply felt by the people who are coming out to listen to these sorts of things too. They've had enough of
the
that.
shadow minister for
So, and they better have, because it's a non-productive mode of responsibility, man. That's where the meaning in
the
life
chief
is.
executive is aware. Boris Johnson's office is aware from both sides, London and his constituency.
Got to know that there are differences in intelligence. It's really important. If you go into a job and you're not smart enough for that job, you're going to have one bloody miserable time, and you're going to make life wretched for the people around you because you won't be able to handle the position. And as you climb hierarchies of competence, the demand on fluid intelligence increases. And so, unless you want to fail, you don't put yourself in over your head. Well, what's over your head? Well, that's a tricky thing to figure out. I mean, you have to figure that out with intelligence, you have to figure it out with conscientiousness, you have to figure it out with creativity, you have to figure it out with stress tolerance, with agreeableness, because you want to go into a cooperative environment and not a competitive one if you're agreeable. And with neuroticism, you probably want to keep the stress level of your job relatively low, because those are all places that you can break down. And most people have at least one significant weakness in their intelligence personality makeup, and you got to be careful not to place yourself in a position where that's going to be a fatal flaw. But what you really want to do, as far as I can tell, if you want to maximize your chances for both success and let's say well-being, is you want to find a strata of occupation in which you would have an intelligence that would put you in the upper quartile. That's perfect. Then you're a big fish in a small pond, and you don't want to be the stupidest guy in the room. It's a bloody rough place to be. So, and you probably don't want to be the smartest guy in the room either, because what that probably means is you should be in a different room, right? You should look at a place where if you're right at the top, you've mastered it. It's time to go somewhere where you're a little lower so that you've got something to climb up for. So, and if you're not hyper conscientious, for example, you're probably not going to want a job that you have to work 70 hours a week at, because you're just not wired up that way. Rather have some leisure. Like, more power to you. If that's how you're wired up, there's nothing wrong with having some leisure. But if you're someone who can't stand sitting around doing nothing ever, then maybe you can go into a job that's going to require you to work 75 hours a week. And almost all jobs that are at the top of complex dominance hierarchies require very high intelligence and insane levels of conscientiousness, as well, generally speaking, as pretty damn high levels of stress tolerance. Because that can knock you out too, because there's going to be sharp fluctuations in your career, generally speaking, at the higher levels of a structure, and you have to make very complicated decisions, often with very short time horizons. So you have to decide if that's what you want.
So let me just turn this off on. It's just going to turn on. So basically, I'm wondering how many children that have left foster care have not left with their children, and how many young girls have had relationships with older men that have obviously then not left with their children. How many women or even men have been through domestic violence and then gone on to lose their children? How many people with medical failure have gone through to lose their children? How many people with mental health failure have gone through to lose their children through long-term foster care, special guardian and forced adoption, even those involved in denied contact? But yes, I now can officially access people's paperwork under the fact that when I get off from here, I will be linked up, connected up, moving things forward with other people. My case going through people that I've met in the order that as I've met them from 2013. But also prior to that, obviously, there was a couple of my personal friends that led me into this world with their own personal circumstances. One being my best friend from when I was like 17. So that opened me up to somebody who was adopted and went through abuse as an adopter. So that's obviously a fear, because I do know somebody who was adopted and abused by an adopter. I grew up with her from 17 and we're still friends. And then later, her daughter has gone on to have her daughter taken due to needing the police to go and get her stuff from the property and classed as DV because the ex wouldn't let her get it. And then mother was also now lost, who was my friend, her children to special guardianship. So anyway, I asked the question, why didn't parents fight? And I come to learn that people are just so vulnerable and on their own and isolated, and when you've got people telling you you're this and you're that, it's very difficult to get that attitude. Not what people don't give a shit about. It's not about them not giving a shit about what people think. It's about just knowing who you are so much that when people say you're this and that, you go, well, actually, I know my true integrity, and that's not a reflection of me. That's a reflection of your own fears and perceptions, and I can't get involved in that right now because this is my boundaries and that's your thing. And I love you for who you are, but it's whether it gets manipulative or whether it's done because somebody is genuinely opening up to it. I don't know how anyone can leave Josie on her own. She's at home, where she is in a hostel, trying to focus. I've got her laptop, it's in front of me. I've got obviously her email, my email, proceedings document, proceedings editing document, parental report, Kelly Yahoo search to see what everybody's going to see and represents me. Funny enough, the irony is the troll people are the first main person with the kelly-cotton.com website, but my official one is kellycotton.co.uk. But what they've put is actually quite funny. It says my character quite well. People who know me will be giggling. So anyway. Then the ideal life is called My Ideal Life for Family.blogspot.com, and it was something that I wrote on Saturday, the 14th of June 2014, that I was going through. Obviously, the video that I had open for you guys listening to with me at the time, and all Josie's UK sensation doodah stuff. And then obviously I've got my Facebook open, I've got my LinkedIn open, I've got my Twitter open, I've got my Instagram open, I've got you guys open. So obviously, as from Monday, if it's saying my connection is unstable, let me just check my phone. Because I've got Josie's laptop, I've been able to plug into my phone to get internet to be able to get on and open the document to get on. I should even be able to write my document now. So even my book, it depends. Josie needs the laptop really to do her side of all of this. But obviously she's got the solicitor doing this. But the solicitors have jumped up and gone, Josie, have you been talking to Kelly all this time? And Josie sort of well, who was I meant to turn to when you're all like thing, and like she's the only person that I find peace with. So what rights have you got to take that from me? That's sort of what she said. So they now want to work with me on the basis that I remove things from my statement that are in relation to them, but they haven't actually seen my true statement yet, and ask that I no longer leave messages on their answer machine threatening that as soon as the orders come through that I have the evidence to sue all parties involved if they proceed with this. So the mayor is aware, Morgan is aware, chief executive is aware, many parties are aware. The question I'm going to ask about is what you're going to do about it. Officially, Children's Social Care should provide her with her own budget for care leavers, which should be her trust fund, all of the sort of things that have been. She hasn't got competent parents, as said right now, or through this previous social. Mum ran from Poland to save children here in the UK, lost them here, many other matters and things like that. So anyway, I would not be allowed to go parties to proceedings if I talk about this case. But if I don't continue speaking the way that I am, then I put myself in a situation that puts my boys at risk, which I'm not willing to do. And also, I need to work with them because Josie does need support and help with what she's been through. She's 18 and she needs to transition properly with a bit of mothering. So I don't know what the future holds, but right here, right now, I can give her that little bit of mothering and guidance to sort of like transition from an 18-year-old. And I didn't get to do this with Liam because obviously what happened with Aaron is to give that back to somebody I can give to. And because I don't get to see Faith until she's 18, it would be nice to not let Josie be a representation of what Faith could be and help Josie be back to who she really could have been had even the previous foster parents, the main ones that sort of gave her that stability, hadn't abused her, and she would have had the life of the things that she got to know and grow to. So, you know, there's options for Josie here, and there's all the services. There's look, James Mumby said adoption last resort, when nothing else will do, and COVID has just taken time up. She's only had 1 hour on a Monday morning, 1 hour on a Monday, Thursday afternoon, 2 hours when there's been assessments, and only then, and that's not good. Bond breaking has commenced since these reports have been in. All intentions have always been on adoption. I have evidence that the adoption panel met last year to agree to go to adoption on the baby. Yes, she's being cared for. Yes, she's being looked after. Yes, she's beautiful. Yes, she's lovely. But there is no support for people who've been through this, even post-adoption counselling. There's nothing really. There's sort of things, but not things. You've got to tick certain boxes. You've got to be part of this. You've got to be part of that. Don't agree with the left. Don't agree with the right. Don't have this political persuasion. Don't do this denomination. Don't do this. Don't do this. And you're up against persecution wherever you go with this. So I just don't think that Josie needs to go through this alone. And I really do hope that if I can do something, I've got nothing to lose, because as far as they're aware, she hasn't been speaking to me. She's done as she's told. And that was, if she spoke to me, she'd never see her child again. So she's done as she's told. The baby's going. She's on her own. So whatever I do, I hope is better than anything that she's in now. But officially, she can be at the Roberts Centre here by Monday afternoon. Whether baby would cope returning immediately, I don't know, but the foster parents can keep going around and visiting Josie until baby is settled back with mother. Number back. Simple. Round of applause, please. Anyway, guys, I'm tired. I'm going to go. Thanks to those that are here. Something about Go Troll Channel. Bambi Thumber, I don't know who that is. Hey, Charlie. We really will have down at Victoria Park at some point, maybe at St James's Cafe. My boys don't tend to stay in the same place at some time, but Dean's here with the boys at some point, so I can go back and forth and do stuff. So anyway, if you're sitting in masked up or walking around masked up, I'm wondering how people are feeling about it. I'm wondering how people are feeling about what you're being told, what mutation about it, whether you're having a vaccination, whether you're not. I was really shocked to walk down the hill and see that queue for vaccinations today. That shocked me. And to see so many people walking around la-di-da as if they were like set free to a vaccine, to a virus that's changed. Anyway, night guys, I'm going to sleep.